Hello everyone, this is Jason from Primetime Aquatics. Thank you so much for being here. I was going to walk around the gallery and take care a little bit of the algae, and I thought, I've actually never done a video explaining all the different types of algae, and I think we have right now all the different types of algae between the gallery and the fish room. I'm going to talk about what it is and how to get rid of it. Hope you enjoy the video. Okay, so I wanted to use this aquarium as an example first because it's got a few different types of algae in this aquarium. This is a 125 in our gallery, and the two different types of algae we've got, one of them is going to be a lot more obvious, and that's right here on these plants, and that is the dreaded, horrible, infamous Blackbeard algae. Yes, you can see it on the plants right here. You can see it growing on that crinum as well, and it has been in this tank now for a while. You see it there on the plant roots. Now, it doesn't really matter what type of algae we are dealing with, whether it's Blackbeard algae here or some other type of algae that we're going to be discussing in this video. There are a few key things that you can do to control it. One, make sure you are controlling your light duration and light intensity if you can. How long your lights are on and how bright your lights are going to make a big difference in terms of whether or not you're going to get algae growth. The second thing, nutrients. We really want to try to keep our nitrate concentrations down to less than 20 parts per million. If you've got a planted tank like you're seeing here, 25 to 30 maximum, but the more nutrients you have in the aquarium, the more likelihood there is for algae to grow. Next thing is we want to make sure that we have plants in the aquarium if we can. Plants are going to help compete for those nutrients and keep the algae at bay. Now here you're looking at a Siamese algae eater. That's the other thing that you can do, and that is add organisms to the aquarium that can eat algae. And these Siamese algae eaters, you see it way back there on the back leaf, are outstanding at eating Blackbeard algae, especially when they are younger. We've got a couple of them in this aquarium. I'm probably going to add a couple more. They're going to keep that Blackbeard algae at bay. I don't fear this type of algae. I know a lot of people do, but when you keep your light intensity and duration in check and you make sure that you're doing your water changes and you've got some organisms that can eat the algae, that can really help control it so it doesn't grow out of control. You're also seeing in this particular tank that green spot algae. That's another one a little bit harder to get rid of. You're seeing it on the glass right here. With that green spot algae, everything I just said to control it applies for this as well. When it comes to types of organisms that will eat it, it's fairly limited. Maybe bristlenose plecos will keep a little bit of control over it. Nearite mystery snails possibly as well, although I have not found any of the inhabitants to do an outstanding job of that harder green spot algae. And because of that, the number one way to get rid of it is really with a razor blade. In fact, we did a video right there in the upper right-hand corner, the best razor blade setup that we've used. It's cheap and it's convenient, and it really does an awesome job, way better than most of the aquarium types of algae scrapers. The razor blade with the handle that I show you in that video in the upper right-hand corner, much, much better option. I will also put the videos I reference in this video in the description below. There's a couple other things you can do to control Blackbeard algae like you're seeing here. One is you could use hydrogen peroxide to control it. Basically what you do in this instance is if you can remove the plants or the rocks or the wood or whatever structure is covered in Blackbeard algae, spray that down with hydrogen peroxide, leave it outside of the water for about 5 to 10 minutes. Then when you put it back in, usually it turns a pinkish color and starts to die back. There are also algicides out there. They are called liquid CO2. They really don't offer any CO2 to plants, but they do kill off some types of algae. I'm not a huge fan of using chemicals to destroy algae. I much prefer to do the things I've talked about with light control, making sure that you have only the nutrients necessary for your plants and any organisms. Now, this is our 50-gallon low boy. This is the back side. You don't often see it very much because of our live streams. It's coming from the other direction. But you can see we have some Blackbeard algae on these plants, and this was much worse. This tank was much, much worse. You could see a little bit on the glass as well, but a lot of it has been taken care of, and the reason for that, once again, is our Siamese algae eaters. Not Chinese algae eaters, but Siamese algae eaters. I'll show you another picture of that in a second. These are outstanding fish because they will eat the Blackbeard algae. You got to give them a little bit of time, and you have to kind of balance the food that you're putting in the aquarium. Of course, you want to feed these fish because you don't want them to starve. That would be cruel. But you also don't want so much food available where they get really lazy and don't graze on the surfaces of your plants and your rocks and your wood. And you can see a small Siamese algae eater there. They do get to be about 4 or 5 inches. They can be a little bit aggressive with one another, so keep that in mind. Generally speaking, I would maybe put one in a 20-gallon, but I like to have a larger tank, a 4-foot tank or a 40 breeder if I'm going to be adding more than one. And here we actually have a 20-gallon tank. These are Siamese algae eaters, again, on the smaller side that have gone through quarantine. We're bringing in the swaps because so many people love these for the Blackbeard algae. But yeah, big group of them right here. So we're going from probably the worst, the scariest algae to what I think is the easiest algae to control, and that is the brown diatom algae that you are seeing right here on this glass. The reason it exists in this tank, and it's by far the easiest, like I said, to control and remove, is this is a quarantine tank right now. We had a bunch of Apistogramma panduro. I think there's one left in this particular tank, but we have no snails and no bristlenose plecos in this aquarium. But just like all other types of algae, controlling light, controlling nutrients goes a long way. This algae, most of your typical algae-eating type fish will eat it, and that includes your mystery snails, nearite snails, pest snails, bristlenose plecos, otocinclus. They will clear this stuff off in a hurry. I had one of our 75 gallons in the gallery covered in the stuff, put 2 small bristlenose plecos in there, and within about 48 hours, it was absolutely spotless. So if you see the brown diatom algae, it is often most common when you're first setting up an aquarium and the aquarium itself is still trying to reach an equilibrium. Not a big deal. Lots and lots of different types of fish or snails will eat it. If you are looking for more information on the types of fish and snails and inhabitants that eat algae, check out the video in the upper right-hand corner. We have a very thorough video that explains the types of organisms that will eat certain types of algae, but definitely want to consider. I will also put that video in the description below. So this is your green hair algae. Again, this is in one of our 125s. I don't worry about it a lot. It's really easy to remove. I'm actually going to show you that in a second. The green hair algae, again, it grows for all the same reasons we've talked about so far. Light intensity, light duration, too many nutrients. This is another one that's not particularly difficult to get rid of. We have a couple Siamese algae eaters in here. Not necessarily something they love to eat, but they will eat it. They're mostly in there because of the Blackbeard algae. In case it ever shows its ugly face in this tank, it will be taken care of. Organisms that really love the green hair algae. A mono shrimp, if you've got smaller nano tanks with smaller fish like we have here, absolutely a wonderful option. Florida flagfish would be a very good option. They will polish this stuff off. If I had a half a dozen Florida flagfish, I would fully expect not to see this green hair algae within about 3 weeks. Larger mollies, especially the sailfin mollies, if you have a larger aquarium with larger fish, will eat this stuff. Sometimes guppies will, although I haven't found them to eat it as much here. I'm just removing it. Really easy to do. Often that is what most people do. You can take a toothbrush. You can do that by hand. Really easy to remove. It does kind of smell bad. So there's that. So if you pick it out with your hands are going to stink. But other than that, this is not a very difficult algae to deal with. It can look ugly because it's growing all over your wood like you're seeing here. And sometimes it'll grow on plants and kind of extend out. Much bigger pain if it starts to grow within Java moss and stuff. But again, a mono shrimp, absolutely awesome. The Florida flagfish, if you've got a little bit of a larger aquarium, Florida flagfish don't get large, but they will do a great job on that. I already sort of mentioned this in the other tank, but here's another example of that green spot algae, the hard green spot algae. A little bit easier to see here on this Aqua Decor fake background, but again, this stuff was pretty tough to get rid of. We've got bristlenose plecos. You can see one there. They got rid of the brown diatom algae in this tank, but they really don't do a great job with this hard spot green algae. For that, razor blades are good. If it's on this, I leave it. I actually like the way it looks here. If I really wanted to get rid of it, maybe a toothbrush. I'd want to be really careful about that background, but if it was on rocks or wood, a toothbrush would work just fine. And of course, once again, if you've got an aquarium that is snail safe, and this one definitely isn't, the fish in this tank would eat snails, the nearite snails, mystery snails might help a little bit here as well. Now, I wanted to show you a couple of types of algae that are really unusual. This is one. This is a quarantine tank. I don't really care about algae at all. Sometimes I'll scrape it off the front just so I can make sure it's easy to see fish if there's any issues there. This red algae I find it to be very interesting, and I don't do a whole lot to get rid of it because in some tanks, I think it can actually look pretty cool. You will usually find it on rocks here. It is almost always in our fish room. You can see kind of here, if you could actually see through the other algae, it's on the rocks over there, that flagstone. It typically grows right along the line of where the substrate is. The nice thing about this red algae is it grows very, very, very slowly. It took a really long time for the red algae to establish itself in this aquarium. Now, I have found that absolutely nothing eats it. Snails don't eat it. Fish don't touch it. It is a little bit difficult to remove. You're going to have a really hard time removing it from rocks. But for glass, you're going to need a razor blade, something sharp to remove it from the glass, because it adheres to glass very, very well. Almost, I would say even more so than that hard green spot algae. But there are no fish that eat it. Again, the saving grace for this one is it's so slow growing. It almost doesn't matter, unless it starts to grow all over your rocks and stuff and you don't like the way that looks. This last one, I wanted to show you because it's one of my favorite algae, and when I have it, I absolutely try not to remove it. It's not green hair algae, but it takes on a lot of its properties. And I'll show you in a second when I actually take some off the rock, that it has a very different consistency. It looks awesome on rocks, especially when it's full grown. You can see it on the sponge filter. The only downside is when it starts to run out of surface area, parts of it will break off, as you can see throughout the substrate. This is a giant Coolie Loach quarantine tank with some Malaysian trumpet snails. So this particular algae, it'll only grow maybe a couple inches like you're seeing here, and then it's done, and it kind of waves back and forth in the water. It almost kind of looks like a freshwater version of some type of saltwater algae. So it's really awesome. I'll usually just take a net and scoop that stuff off the substrate, especially if we have to go in and catch fish here. But I love it when it is on the rocks and on wood, because like I said, it doesn't grow out of control. It doesn't grow super fast, and it is very, very easy to remove. If you were looking for inhabitants to remove this stuff, again, I would probably be looking at things like my Florida flagfish and my guppies and my mollies, maybe the Amano shrimp, but it's, as you can see here, it just picks right off, right? So it sticks, but not very much. And it's not like the green hair algae where it starts to, kind of spread out and get all over wood and make these big green hair algae bridges everywhere. This doesn't do that. So I really enjoy this type of algae and having it in the aquarium. And here we have another example. This is our 75-gallon lake tank, and you can take it. It actually has multiple types of algae in it. You can see that harder green spot algae on the side of the glass as we kind of look through. There is some Blackbeard algae starting to grow on the rocks a little bit. You're going to see it on the shells for our shell dwellers. There's a little bit of green spot algae on the front of the glass. I am not stressed about this, and I think that's the number one thing. If we're going to learn anything about this, algae doesn't stress me out. It's just part of an aquarium. I make very few attempts to actually clear it from the back of the aquarium or the sides. The front pane of the glass, the front of the tank, yes, I want that clear because I want to be able to clearly see the fish and the inhabitants. But for the most part, a little bit of algae for me, that's part of a healthy ecosystem. It can help stabilize an ecosystem, especially in our quarantine tanks. It can suck up some of that excess ammonia and nitrite. If there's a small spike there, certainly keep nitrates a little bit lower. So the bottom line is, while we've gone over these different types of algae, I've given you suggestions on ways to control it, organisms that will eat it. And again, I have that video that will be in the description below that will give you a lot more options when it comes to the types of organisms and even using plants to control algae. But overall, I don't think algae is that big of a deal. All right, so when it comes to algae, a few key things. Once again, it doesn't really matter what type of algae you have. One, control your light intensity, control your light duration. Your lights might be on too long, or the lights might be too strong for the aquarium that you have based on the inhabitants that you have. Much easier to do if you don't have live plants. Then you can really turn the lights down and really control that duration just to get the algae under control. Next thing is control your nutrients, especially your nitrate concentrations. In all of our aquariums, we try to keep our nitrates at around 20 parts per million or less. If you've got a planted tank, you can let that go a little bit more, 25, 30 parts, but once you get beyond that, you're going to have a lot more algae issues. Next thing, think about your inhabitants. If you've got potential algae-eating organisms that you can add for smaller tanks, less aggressive tanks, allow your snails work. Mystery snails, nearite snails are awesome. Otocinclus, certainly for the brown diatom algae. If you've got larger tanks, now you're looking at 20 gallons or above and maybe slightly more aggressive fish, your bristlenose plecos are a really good option. Potentially your Florida flagfish, your Siamese algae eaters. Part of that, again, depends on the type of algae that you have. Amano shrimp are really great at eating green hair algae. If you've got a nano tank and you've got that issue, so some options there. If you want to see more on algae-eating organisms, check out that video right there in the upper right-hand corner. I will also put it in the description below. Really appreciate you being here, and we'll see you in the next one.